Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's panel on mindfulness. I've been fortunate to chat with over 150 remarkable people on my Intentional Performance podcast. And these people have overcome adversity, thought deeply about leadership, and they've set up intentional lives for themselves to perform at their best. And our panelists today certainly fit that bill. The coronavirus has created challenges for so many throughout the world. And it is my hope that these panel discussions will help those in need. While everyone on the panel has tremendous expertise, not just in mindfulness, but in many other areas of their life, I also want to note that what we are going through is truly unprecedented, and there may be questions that the panelists don't have the answer to, and I think that's completely okay. This isn't designed to give you the answer to every question you have. Instead, it's designed to have you think deeply about how you can handle this challenging time. So to start, I want to provide a bit of information on mindfulness just to get us going. There are many definitions, and I'm curious to hear how each of you think about mindfulness. But for me, there's a couple bullet points that are just helpful to frame our conversation. So I think of mindfulness as being sensitive to context and perspective, observing without judgment, paying attention on purpose while also being in the present. And it's rule and routine guided, but not necessarily governed. Really at its core, I love to think of mindfulness as active noticing. And that's been a really helpful way of thinking about mindfulness in my life and in my career. So while we may understand what mindfulness is, I'm excited to chat with each of these panelists to learn about how we can use it and really get into the weeds on how we can leverage this during this chaotic time. And for many people are going through crises. So with that, I'd like for each of our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Keith.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me, Brian. Pleasure to be here with all of you. Who am I? Well, I've started as an NFL football player, as an all-pro linebacker. I went from Texas A&M to New Orleans Saints to the Texans to the Jaguars. And the Jaguars was where my journey really began for me. I suffered paralysis through a tackle being made, like I've made millions of times. And I ended up on my back, and through the process being diagnosed with a spinal contusion, my C2 through C4 been fused in the hospital while being paralyzed and going through that. A nurse, she taught me the concept of conscious breathing, which later led to meditation, which found me here with mindfulness. And from that sent me on my journey of just discovery, the inquiry of questioning and answering. And it's been an amazing journey that's led us from the White House to the UN and to just all over the world. I'm just getting my honorary doctorate here in Africa, but the trip is delayed, but because of the coronavirus and so forth. But it's just been a tremendous whirlwind. I look at mindfulness or the whole concepts of self-mastery, self-development, and allowance of ourselves to grow and attain our greatest potential. It's awareness. It's really the thirst for knowledge. To go and get it, to research it, because it is an investment that I feel we must take. When we want to make these, make an impact in the world, or do the things that we ultimately desire. So it's just been a tremendous attribute to my life. And I have a book coming out, the Mindfulness Playbook. And again, we can talk about that as well, but grateful to be here.
Thanks,
Grateful
Keith.
to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Stu, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Stu Singer. I am a performance psychologist by training and trade, and I would say that in general, my job is to be a mental skills coach for the teams and organizations and programs that I work with, and the individual athletes and performers that I work with. I think the biggest thing and kind of what led me to be on this panel and with the use of mindfulness is, over the years as a performance psychologist, I think the biggest thing that I was always in quest of, first as an athlete and then as a coach, and then finally in this role, was that we discuss so often the what we should do with our mind. And I always felt that it fell short. Like it felt short for me when I was trying to develop mental skills, and it felt short as a coach. And even it fell short, I think, as I was early in my career. And then at some point, and I've been off and on practicing mindfulness since probably about 2006, roughly. But really bad to start. Really, when I say off and on, it was a lot more off than on. But over time, started to kind of get it a little bit, and then at some point, I said, "Man, this is the actual how of training our brain." And I'm sure we'll get deeper into this as we go. But to me, that was really what brought me to this, and it was my way of kind of giving back to the clients and athletes that I work with, to say, you understand training, your body, and this is a way for you to train your mind. So that was probably what brought me to the practice most deeply. And certainly I use it every day to make sure that I'm on point as best as I can be as well.
Fantastic. Steve, why don't you take us home?
Where to start? Well, first and foremost, it's great to meet the other panelists, and thanks for tuning in. My name's Steve Schlafman. I typically live in New York City, though with the coronavirus, my family and I have escaped. We're about 2 hours north of the city right now in the woods, and unbelievable, surreal and crazy times. I have spent almost the last 2 decades in technology. So the first decade of my career was spent at a number of great organizations, first Microsoft, then a number of startups, and then the Kraft Group and the New England Patriots, where I was helping with a range of strategic projects at the Kraft Group. And I really had a twist of fate and luck that brought me back to New York, where I became a professional venture capitalist. So for the last decade, I have worked at some of the top venture capital funds in New York City, predominantly early stage, which means seed and Series A. And about 6 years ago, even though I've been practicing yoga myself since 2003 when I moved to Seattle, about 6 years ago, I was on vacation and stumbled across the book, The Power of Now. And I read it in the course of 2 days, and it just completely knocked me on my ass. And I came back from that trip and called a friend that I knew had a pretty consistent meditation mindfulness practice. And I said, I really need to learn how to bring this into my life on a daily basis. And that was 6 years ago. And my life is radically transformed since. About 9 months from there, I got sober. About 18 months from that moment, I quit my job as a VC, and decided to be a coach. And for the last 3 years, I work predominantly with founders and CEOs of early stage companies, so anywhere from seed to Series C. So in other words, basically for anywhere from 2 to 5 to call it 150 employees. And I also operate a small angel fund where I invest a small amount of capital and play the role of mentor, advisor, coach, evangelist, as opposed to institutional investor. So what I like to say is, my life's work for certainly the next 10 years and hopefully much longer is to help founders bring their wildest visions to reality and help them evolve into extraordinary leaders. And so that's my purpose in life. And it's great to be with you all, and I can't wait to dive in with the other panelists.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So Stu mentioned the how and being obsessed with the how. So Keith, I'm curious for you. Steve mentioned yoga, and I know yoga has been a big part of your experience as well. But Keith, I'd love to start with you and learning about how you leverage mindfulness, how you think about it. What does it actually look like for you?
It looks like a lot of things. I mean, there's a saying that you can't speak someone into liberation. You must have the embodiment. And that's why the physical aspect of it, like, we talk about surrender, but when have you ever been in a position where you've accepted the idea of surrendering, and not just the idea, but physically? So these dynamics have to be played out as experiences so we can attain the knowledge. So that's how it's done. And by creating new experiences, you leverage the intel, the what we call the senses, or what I call intelligence. and we begin to, as we have new experiences, we take it all in. We can absorb it. It's like a concept of just being in that moment, being present. Well, we have to fully be engaged, and our full intelligence is engaged with it. So that's kind of what it means to me.
And Stu, how about you?
Yeah, I again, going back to kind of how it, kind of ended up becoming such an essential part of my practice, and in that how is that, I think everything that we do comes back to attention. Ultimately, if our attention isn't there, first of all, as Keith was saying, we can't even be with it. We can't absorb it because our attention's not there. But not only is it attention, but it's also what type of attention, right? So what are we paying attention to? And by what we pay attention to ultimately becomes the experience that we have of whether it be our entire life, if you want to go big picture, or small, like right now in this very difficult time, what are we choosing to place our attention on? And it's okay, by the way, to place our attention on fear. It's okay to place our attention on some of the anxiety that comes from this, or the unknown, certainly, that we're all experiencing. But the other end of it is that, if we stay in that too long, that's when we can probably start to feel pretty bad and overwhelmed. And so what else are we paying attention to? The opportunity that we have in front of us, in terms of spending time with our family, of slowing down, of choosing some gratitude and what we're grateful for. All these things are the type of attention that we're paying. And I know for me, and I don't want to speak for anybody else here on the panel, but I know for me, before my practice became legitimately the cornerstone of how I live, first of all, then teaching others, I probably was pretty random and not always very good at my attention. I probably, as we understand more about our mind, is that our mind is designed to drift towards what's scary and challenging. And so if we don't have an understanding of that, if we can't see where our attention flows to, it's going to be hard for us to shift that place of focus. And so for me, that's the core of my practice.
Steve, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well.
Yeah. For me, the how is one that, the two words that come to mind are connection and attention. And I think there's a connection with the self, and certainly with the external environment. And then the attention is about, dropping in and sort of, there's a saying that I have, which is like, and I very much learned this as a coach, which is, and I work with founders on this, is like, you can listen with your ears, right? With your ears, but also with your eyes. And there's so much intelligence that we can tap into when we listen with our eyes, when we listen with our ears, when we go into our bodies. And so the how for me, and from a very practical standpoint, is certainly daily meditation every single day. And I often, when I work with leaders, I say, like, the practice of meditation isn't about the practice when you're on the mat. It's around sharpening your senses so that when you're off the mat, you can be more effective, aware, connect. And and so there's the how as like the actual like practice of on a daily basis, but then there's even when I'm off the mat. And for me, the thing that I try to connect to in order to like tap into this intelligence of eyes, ears, body, others, sensory senses that are coming in, is this idea of the breath, right? And using the breath as a tool to unlock that intelligence, whether I'm in a coaching session or whether I'm with my daughter, and any time I find myself drifting, stress, anxiety, clinging on to a pleasurable thought, back to breath. And I don't try to throw those thoughts and perceptions and feelings away, but I just note them and simply note them, and just try to show up that way. And the last thing I'll say is, I love this metaphor. I've done some training with this great organization called Everyman, and Dan Doty, who's one of the founders, uses this analogy. I personally don't hunt myself, but being up in the woods when you're really still, if you're hunting, right? Hunting is a form of meditation. And when you're out in the woods, oftentimes you're not fixed on one specific point, right? You're sort of just grazing, and your perception is open, and your ears, your hearing, right? And you're sort of like casting a net to be able to catch and then be able to divert the attention. And so I love that. Like, I try to see, like, every day when I'm out, whether it's a coaching session or meeting with an entrepreneur, it's how do I like expand that net so that I can tap into all of this intelligence around us and inside myself.
It's interesting for me because I've made a distinction between mindfulness and meditation that's been helpful for me. And I heard a lot of you say the practice. And when I hear the practice, I go to meditation. I go to the action of sitting silently or whatever you're choosing to do. There's so many different ways to meditate. And then mindfulness for me is a framework, and sort of what you're talking about, Steve, of just noticing, observing, and being. I'm curious to get your insight as far as meditation and mindfulness, and we can popcorn around. We don't have to go in any sort of order. So if one of you wants to jump on that, and if you distinguish between the two, or if they're married or interwoven, and I'm just curious to get your perspectives on it.
Well, I'd like to say something on that. You know, mindfulness is the codified way that we want to live. It's the intention. It's like our desire. And meditation is the way we respond. It's like we have this saying in football. We said we think on the weekday and we react on Sunday. It's like you do your due diligence, you do your contemplation, you realize, okay, what am I creating right now? And in my practice or in my day-to-day is my meditation. What's not meditation? You know, you have an intent of breathing. Breathing is a processing mechanism. And then through our intention, we have the way we respond. And that's how I see it. So I'd be curious to know how you guys see it.
Yeah, very much the same as what you guys are saying, is that I talk to my athletes all the time about the difference between mindfulness practice, which to me is the 10 minutes where, for me, 10 minutes that I practice or that I ask them to practice daily. And then there's living or performing mindfully. And those are two different things. One is the act of doing, then the other one is a way of being. And how do I experience moment after moment after moment, and be able to see it clearly for whatever it is, whether it is a difficult moment or it's a great one, but being able to see it and experience it in the moment, and have a little bit of wiggle room between reacting to the moment or responding to the moment. And that's, I think, as you get deeper into your practice and you have that, you know, for me, it was, I can't remember how many days, but it wasn't more than a few days in when I really got serious about it, that all of a sudden I was experiencing something that was just middle of the day, may have been family related. And I felt whatever brewing up reaction wise in me, and I didn't have to go with it. I recognized that it was not going to be helpful, and I was able just to kind of have that little bit of tiny space between what was happening and how I was then going to deal with it and manage it. And to me, that's living mindfully, that's performing mindfully, which is different than the 10 minutes that I sit in stillness. And those are completely, they're connected, because that's how the training of it, but then it's a way of life, it's a way of being.
Yeah, I would just add that for me, when people ask me what type of meditation I practice, I will say mindfulness, because the technique is a mindfulness based approach to meditation. It's anapana, which is following the breath, and a lot of body scanning and sort of tuning into the emotional state. And from a Western perspective, very much, so it's anapana and vipassana, though, to Westerners, that's considered mindfulness meditation. I started out using a form of meditation that was transcendental meditation, which is a very different technique, which I personally have different results from. But for me, I can only speak based on my own experience, but the practice of mindfulness meditation allows me to live a life more mindfully when I'm off the mat. And I think Stuart really hit it on the head, which is like one of my favorite books of all time is Man's Search for Meaning. And so when people ask me, well, what are the benefit of having a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice? I say it's like this quote where it says, in between a stimulus and a response is a space. And that space basically allows you to determine how you choose to respond. And, I think that for me, when I heard Stuart said that, I lit up, because for me, that's mindfulness at work, when you're out in the world and you're living your life, and there's, all these different experiences and emotions and perceptions hitting us, but it allows us to stop for a second and just really tune into what our experience is. So I don't think I have any more to add, because I think between Keith and Stuart, I think they nailed it.
Well, the interesting thing, if I can come behind that, is that how I look at it is I say, well, life has no meaning. We give meaning to life. Mm. And by that, we are here to solve problems. In the way that I do it, like say, for instance, one of the questions I ask people, since a lot of talk about breath, for instance, I ask, well, what happens when you breathe? And what you'll find, even the meditators, they've never asked that simple question. And what we know is the more you can conceptualize something, the more it can be used as a tool. So when I contemplate the idea, the mechanics of what's happening in my body when I breathe, the logic behind it, oh, I get it. And just for the sake of the audience, because we're going through this, who may be tuning in, is and this is what I learned in the hospital. Very interesting, as an athlete who's brave and felt that they could do anything physically possible, but I didn't know what happened when I breathe. So on the inhale, the diaphragm pushes down. On the exhale, it pushes up. So what's stagnant, or what's naturally moving, is our heart and our lungs. They move naturally. They don't need our assistance. But what becomes stagnant is the internal organs. And then when we realize the emotion behind the organs, anger is in the liver, fear is in the kidneys, worries in the gut. So the dynamic of that, when we're breathing 10,000 breaths a day, we're massaging the internal organs. So now we're more in a contemplative mode instead of a reactionary mode. And it changes the whole dynamic, the whole chemistry of what we call our reaction or our response. And in regards to that, for me, it sounds even more like we begin to create an emotional maturity through that process at the same time. So
if I'm interested, do you then because everything that I do is trying to then take probably the Eastern philosophical, ideals and ideas of the practice, and making them digestible for people who may not be interested in hearing it through that framework. And so what hit me when you said that, when you were talking about the breath and kind of the stimulation of internal, is that to me becomes a physical workout. By describing it that way, it's almost like a building of a skill. It's building that's a workout. And I'm just interested to know, is that how would you even frame it that way, or was that completely not how you would think of it in those terms?
I would definitely frame it that way. And the reason being is because the dis-ease in the body happens through the emotional response. And that's why we covered the liver being anger, the kidney, fear, the gut is worry. So these dynamics are fueling our consciousness, is fueling our reaction. And when these parts of our bodies are not getting fed, not getting nurtured, well, then the natural response is going to be that. So it's just a mechanical aspect of, bringing it all together and seeing how it works. And again, now when I'm in my moment, when I'm in the situation that life presents me, now I have something that I can really go to and I can understand why I do it. It's like we're talking about the how, but here's why. So we're adding the dimensions to our discovery. So it's pretty
So
cool.
it's funny because as I present it, I always try to lay it out as a framework of that the how for me is greater than the why, which is then greater than the what. But the reality is so much of what we do in life is we start with the what and we kind of let people to their own devices with the what. And to me, that's the least of my, I want to know why, what does it do? What's going on inside of me? What's going on up here? So that's important because there's a science of what's happening, right? But even then, more importantly, is now that I understand why, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to train this? And to me, again, that was my, that was the jumping off point for me. Is once I connected those pieces, it was life altering. Is the best way to say it. It was life altering at that point.
Right.
Interesting. So hearing you talk, Stuart, and I obviously spend a lot of time working with Type A founders that are very logical in their thinking, and for me, like I try to go into neuroscience and the explanation of like why breath matters. And when we find ourselves in these charged situations where maybe our sympathetic nervous system is kicked in and we're in fight or flight mode, that closes off our brain. Like our executive decision making functions basically go offline. So we can't be creative, we can't access our best thinking, we can't make rational decisions. And so one of the best tools to start to get your parasympathetic nervous system firing is by tuning into the breath, right? It naturally relaxes the body. And so from that point, once you tap in and you allow yourself to breathe for a certain period of time, you can actually make better decisions. You can actually be a lot more effective. And I recently took an amazing class online with an organization called Coaches Rising, which was the science of the neuroscience of change. Highly recommend it for those that are interested. And I love this saying, which is like, if you think about the amount of nerve endings in our body or just the nerve matter, certainly we have our brain, but there's arguably just as much nerve matter under our necks, starting with the vagus nerve, which is a massive nerve that comes down your neck and into your body. And there are just as much nerve matter in your lower body than in your brain. And why is that? Because we've evolved over long periods of time and we've developed this body intelligence. So what I like to say is, like, if we don't allow ourselves to tap into our breath and our bodies, then we're basically not allowing ourselves to tap into our full intelligence. And if you think about, there's obviously intellectual intelligence, right? Or, IQ, and then there's EQ. And I'm hearing a lot of people say, like, the next evolution is going to be this like somatic or body intelligence, because for a long time, like, we haven't allowed ourselves to like really go into our bodies and tap in, and there's so much intelligence here. So, I like to always go back to the science, because I think a lot of the people that I like to work with are science geeks, and they want to know the logical reason as to why this actually matters.
Well, yeah, here's the thing, because when we talk about the nutrition to these organs that fuel the emotional response, that's just it. It's your nervous system. And when that nervous system is cut off from oxygen, cut off from the blood flow, well, it can't get fed. So therefore the reactionary is going to be there. So
and you tighten up and you constrict, and
exactly. So the left brain person will get that totally. Also, when you talk about science, let's think of this since today, the coronavirus. Well, what was it? Emoto in the late 1800s, theorem that viruses cannot sustain in an oxidized environment. And so what we're talking about with oxygen is pH, potential hydrogen. But what we're familiar with is the MPH. So the concept of processing. we're slowing things down. So now when you put it in regards of athletics, you put it in regards of respond time, where we get an opportunity to slow things down, process it, make sense of it. And then with the mindfulness practice, we put our intention out. We put our constructive behavior with it or response with it. And it even goes into another dynamic. I'll say this one more thing, and how we define words and how we look at words. And see, in regards of conditioning, these words have been explained and been told to us, but we've never divvied into how it works for us and what makes sense and articulates us truly. We're taking on the burdens of this world concept, and it's not really reflecting us solely. And therefore we respond and misdiagnose ourselves with these things of anxieties and stresses and things like that, when it's really something else. So I'll let you have it.
No, it's so interesting because at the end of the day, we're all connected by what we're saying. We may have our own practice, we may have our own way of articulating it, but at the end of the day, it's all connected. And the reality is that we are taking this thing that's not about, but is very connected with the idea of stillness, which seems like non-doing. And we are in a world, all of us are in a world of a bunch of doers, of people that are on the end of, I want to achieve, I want to grow, I want to become better, I want to win, I want to make a lot of money, whatever it is. And these are very doing things. And so their minds are very connected to those. And so to talk about this, I feel like we almost have to talk about the science, because without it, it may seem too somewhere out there for the person that just no, I need, if I can squeeze in another doing, that's what I'm going to do. I ultimately do explain mindfulness as doing. It's not that it's not passive. It's actually active, engaged. But you have to almost go to the science. And I do a little bit when I talk about the science and the neuropsychology of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, and I rename the amygdala the gorilla, and I rename the prefrontal cortex as the human, and I say, in a hand-to-hand fight, who wins? Always the gorilla, right? So if you don't want the gorilla to hijack in those moments where you have to have this laser-like ability to be aware of what's happening and what's needed, then you're going to have to learn how to tame that part of the brain. And we know it to be true, that it does tame the amygdala. It brings it down, and it makes the prefrontal cortex that much stronger. And so again, from a very science aspect, from a very functional aspect, we can talk about it like that. And then we can teach the practice of doing, and why the repetition, and how important it is to be something that we do daily, not just kind of haphazard. It all comes out once, but you have to give a framework for it, because I agree with you. Ultimately, the people that we're working with in all these environments are people that just want to move and gain and grow and get somewhere, and it feels counterintuitive for them until they understand it from that aspect.
And I get that. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, here's the interesting thing is, like, you can, we as coaches and helpers can talk about the science and the reasons why someone should adopt a practice. But what I found is that there needs to be the desire, right? And there needs to be, as John Kabat-Zinn, he wrote a book called, Wherever You Go, There You Are. It's on my bedside right now, and I've been reading it a lot. And he talks about, you need to have a vision, right? And for me, I ultimately committed to meditation largely because I wanted to get sober, and I wanted to ultimately have a better life. And I used that as a tool to fuel my practice, to the point where when I became ready, once I had spent enough time with myself. And, I often hear a lot of people say, oh, I've tried meditating, it doesn't work for me. I have all these thoughts running through my head. Like, I can't sit still.
And you're like exactly.
Yeah. And
exactly.
I've been prescribed Adderall. I had ADHD as a kid. And I can sit for an hour and meditate. And that doesn't mean that it's a cessation of thoughts and experiences, that my mind is quiet. Far from it. And my older brother, who's in the hedge fund world in New York, he's the last person I thought would take up meditation. And he and I were talking a few months ago, and he's like, but there are some days where I just have these amazing meditations where my mind is clear and I feel like I've dropped into my body and I'm transcending. There are other days where it's a shit show and there's all these thoughts coming in and out and it's a mess. And I said, well, like, let's use the analogy of the weather, right? Like, we go outside and it's raining, it's sunny, it's snowing, and we can't control that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say in all this is we can't control our experience. And so I think, like, at the end of the day, having a why or a desire that you can anchor on, that you can like anchor to or hold on to, that's like, what is it about meditation? What is it that you actually are hoping to get out of it? And then giving it the time to practice. And I had a call the other day with a founder, and he's like, I really want to meditate, but I struggle. And I was like, 5 minutes a day. Just start with 5 minutes a day. How much is 5 minutes a day? Because I do believe that meditation is one of those things, and he wants to meditate because he wants to be more aware. He wants to perform better, like all these reasons. But unless you really have that inner desire to commit to it, you won't see results, because this is a practice where it is compounding. And the more you give to it, the more you see from it. Anyhow.
Keith, I want to get your thoughts, but I'm also going to throw a question your way. So feel free to riff on what they're talking about. But there's also a curiosity that I have right now is, as Stu talked about the space between, and then Steve summarized it, and going back to Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, I was right there with the two of you. So I'm curious to get, Keith, your perspective on handling space and isolation when you're in the hospital and you're not sure if you're ever going to be able to walk again, and how you're able to handle that. And once Keith is done, Schlaf, Steve goes by Schlaf a lot. So Steve, Schlaf, whatever we're going to call you. We've spent a lot of time together talking, and I know you've done how many day retreats in isolation and silence, like long periods where you've gone off and done isolation and silent retreats. So I want to get, Keith, your perspective is, you made this tackle. And it's not something, to Steve's point, it's not something you wanted. If you had your druthers, you would continue to play and not go through that paralysis. It's not something that you set out for. Whereas Steve, you actually set out and said, hey, I want to have this space and this isolation. So I'm curious to get, Keith, your perspective on when your body was, your physical was sort of taken away from you, and what that was like, because I think that's similar to what some people are going through right now in their own life. They'd rather be at work, or they'd rather be on vacation, or whatever they were supposed to be doing right now, and people are telling them they have to stay at home. I'm curious to get your perspective. And then Steve, you decided to go into that path. So I'd love to hear you all riff on that in the context of mindfulness, or whatever context you want to take it in.
Yeah, that's great. There's a saying that comes to mind, is like, when you squeeze oranges, you get orange juice. And so when they squeeze you, in this isolation is a type of squeeze, you get you. And that you has been reaching out to you the whole time, but we've ignored it. That's the second question I ask people is, when did you first realize that you had a relationship going on with yourself? And you've been in this body the whole time, and the body's been communicating. It's been talking to you. It's been like giving you this sensation. It has pain over here, but we ignore it. And in my opinion, those are the reasons why a lot of people have a hard time meditating, because they're trying to, it's like any other relationship. You hadn't talked to it in 10 years, and you come up like, oh, let's just love each other. Let's just breathe with each other. The body's like, well, who are you? I don't know you. And it doesn't trust you at this point either. So it's like, this is a dynamic that's going on, and the body just wants to be heard. The body just wants, which is you, just wants to be seen first by you, acknowledged first by you. And that creates the complication. That's the ripple effect that I see, that we kind of miss. And we go into these other things because we're trying to fill these so-called voids, not realizing the human that we are, and to develop that. As I see myself, I'm the human. I'm in the practice of being more human with the capacity to be an athlete, with the capacity to be an author, or whatever it is I choose to do. But those things don't make me, they don't break me either. You know, so that's just the goal in mind. This is the idea that I share with mindfulness.
But Keith, I just want to stay with you for a minute. You're laying on that bed. You've made your living and been, you know, one of the top performers in the world at something. Like, you worked your ass off to get to that level. And now you're laying on a hospital bed. I'm sure on Sundays you felt like Superman flying around hitting people. Now you're not able to walk. So you've got space, right? Like, there's a whole lot of space. And I think there's a lot of people right now who are used to being a Superman at their craft or Superwoman at their craft. And now they're like, stay at home with your kids or stay at home by yourself. And they're struggling with that. So I'm curious, when you were laying there, to just talk about that struggle and that experience of what you went through. And perhaps you talked about the breath work being part of your rehabilitation, but talk about what it's like to be on that bed and maybe to feel a little bit in despair.
Well, I mean, that first, time, that first part of the time, you go through the basic depressions and things like that. But then you go through the next moment of realizing that you had been feeling certain ways already for a long time. Again, you just ignored it. Like, I mean, when I look back, I mean, how can you just get excited about hitting somebody all day for year after year after year? At some point I had come to myself, I always say, with those moments when you're in the bedroom alone on the side of the bed and you're sitting contemplating to get up the next day to go and do it again. It's like those moments come like, man, I'm not into this. I don't feel like doing this. This is not fun anymore. But we do it anyway. And those things that are pushing us, in my opinion, equate to those things that we're doing to make us feel whole, to make us feel justified, relevant to whatever these things are. And in my opinion, a lot of those are superficial and they don't really fulfill our hearts, because we excel as this character, but the rest of the part of ourselves is depleted. It's a no-go. It's nothing there. There's no substance there. And for me, I started to realize that. And through the experience also, there's a really profound book that got me into learning who J. Krishnamurti was. And it was a book from Eric Fromm, The Art of Loving. And it began to make me see my condition more as more of a psychology, like a science, instead of more of the emotional response. I started to see how I used to say, I love football. And I loved it to a point of what it gave me. But the reality of, if that's how I view love, then do you want that kind of love in your life? How sane is that kind of love? It's like, so these dynamics and just begin to really reflect on and contemplate, and I begin to answer those questions of what I truly wanted going forward. So that's how I took it.
Awesome. And Steve, talk about your experience being in isolation and what came up for you and what that was like for you.
The last 2 weeks have been a roller coaster, honestly. I'm not gonna lie. I should preface it by saying that I have it really easy. We're very, very fortunate to have left the city, and I work for myself, and I generate an income, and been fortunate to save. And so it's definitely a trying time for a lot of people, and I recognize that. I would say we left the city 2 weeks ago. I have dealt with what I think is pretty severe anxiety for almost the last 2 months about this virus. I actually tweeted this not too long ago, but I took a picture of a journal entry that I made on January 31st. My wife and I were going to New Orleans, and I said, like, what's going on in China just doesn't feel normal, and I'm really afraid that it's going to come here. We saw it coming, and it's like, you're sort of watching a tidal wave come at you, knowing that it's going to hit, and all the people aren't really paying attention to this tidal wave, but you can see it. And living in New York City, which, it makes me so sad to say this, but it's going to be ground zero, and we have lots of friends that are entrepreneurs that own a variety of businesses that are going to be dramatically impacted. I have friends that are laying off all of their entire staffs. You know, I have friends who have already lost parents. And so, you know, for me, I've struggled with the anxiety of not only what's going on in the world and like holding that in my body, but also anxiety about getting sick myself. And you know, I was having some pretty severe symptoms all last week, cold-like symptoms, cough, like mild cough, sore throat, couldn't breathe. It felt like I smoked like 2 packs of cigarettes every day. And this happened for like 12 days where I literally couldn't even get a full breath of air. And I talked to my doctor on Friday and he said, you know, I think it's anxiety. And have you ever, you know, been diagnosed? I said, well, I've had mild anxiety. So, you know, I think there's like been just a whole range of emotions. My wife has had to let, you know, she runs a company herself. She had to let a bunch of her employees go. And so, you know, I think there's just like so much like shame, like I would say, you know, certainly sadness, anxiety. I think there's like certainly a level of guilt that I'm feeling right now, not being in the city and feeling like I'm able to help and contribute to what's going on in the world. And, you know, being a privileged white man that I am, like, you know, and that there's a lot of people out of work and a lot of families are going to be impacted. Like, you know, I'm definitely sitting and feeling that guilt. Um, you know, there are times where I'm trying to feel hopeful. Like I'm trying to view this as an opportunity to like reset and like refocus and spend time with my family. And so like there are times where I can actually like have some positivity, but I'm experiencing the full human range of emotions right now. And, you know, that's just what I'm experiencing, but it's everything from guilt to fear to sometimes optimism. But it's a dark time. And, you know, I'm sad because I can't go home. Like I left so much stuff back in the city, and like I don't know if we're ever going to come back. And like, well, I think the world is going to bounce back from this, no doubt. But the reality is New York's going to be ground zero, and my guess is we're probably not going to get to go home for 2, 3, 4 months. And that just makes me sad because I love the city. It's a big part of my life. And it's just, I know the city will bounce back. I know the country will bounce back, but it's, you know, really has me sad right now.
And I really appreciate you sharing it, because I think it's sort of why I started with the intro that I did, which is everybody's human and everyone's experiencing different levels of this, and your experience is your experience, my experience is my experience, and there's not a good or bad or right or wrong. It's your experience. And Stu, I'm curious to hear your experience. So what I'm thinking of is like, how are we dealing with the space? Because I think we all now have space, whether we want it or not. We have space to ruminate in our own thought. We have space to be with our kids. We have space to be with our spouse. We have space to be with ourselves. And I think for a lot of people, being in that space has felt uncomfortable. And so I'm curious to hear for you personally, how are you dealing with more space?
Yeah, I mean, everything that everybody said is certainly at some point, I've been there, and you use the word discomfort. And, you know, that's how I would frame a lot of the isolation part, and what we're going through, and how it connects back to my own practice. And then again, what I teach, and is that so much of our discomfort. And so we can talk about that in terms of physical discomfort, when we're training and we're in pain, and we need to kind of be in pain and continue knowing that that pain's not hurtful. You know, it's not injury. It is part of the process. And so much of it is because we want to escape it. So if we go back to yoga practice and we talk about, well, what do we say when I have very, very tight hamstrings? So when I'm in a pose that puts me where my hamstrings are burning, I can sit there and say, God, I want to be out of this. How much longer? Why do I have to hold this? Right. So I want to escape the discomfort that I'm in. Or we say, focus on your breathing right now. Breathe. And when I do that, when I can really shift my attention into, no, let me focus into my breath, it makes me stop wanting to escape that feeling. And it makes me say, this is exactly how I'm supposed to be feeling, right? That's part of it, is that discomfort, being able to sit in that discomfort. And once I do that, typically what happens is I can either hold it longer, or sometimes I can even go deeper into that stretch. And I think that's metaphoric for what we're going through right now, is that it should feel, Steve, like what you're saying. And I know that as you were saying that, I'm like, damn, I feel like I've been doing a good job with this. I feel like I've been able to reframe it in a way that I'm valuing the time, and I'm valuing that my job right now is to listen, to do the social distancing, to make sure that my family is listening and doing the social, like, that's our job at the moment. But I'd be lying to say that there's not this underlying like anxiousness around what the hell's going on, and when is it going to be done, and how are we going to come out of this, and what's the impact going to be, and all those things that are clearly should be part of it. And I think when I find myself at my best is when I can say, yes, that's the exact discomfort that I should be feeling, that it's not wrong for me to have those feelings. And I can kind of reconnect with my breath and reconnect with understanding like that discomfort is what ultimately I believe is going to allow us to bounce back. And not just bounce back, but like one of the things that I've been tossing around and thinking about is how freaking amazing people have been. And some of the things, like even this, Brian, this idea of, well, okay, we're isolated. How do I mobilize and do something that if just 5 other people listen to this, we may have had a positive impact. And maybe somebody says, you know what, I'm going to start my mindfulness practice now while we're here. And that's going to be the thing that lets them manage a little bit of the anxieties that they have. And then it's going to help them manage a little bit better with their family and help them manage. And there's going to be a ripple effect. And I'm definitely spending time in the acceptance that the discomfort that we're all going through is also going to become this a little bit of this bounce back platform that I feel like we are definitely, there's going to be changes that are going to come from this that weren't the 4 of us, well, maybe you guys are, you're smarter than me, are already seeing and predicting. But all I can say is I know that there are going to be positive changes that spring from this that we don't know quite yet, but I'm positive that that's what's going to happen with it. And so that's how I frame it.
Can I just jump in? Because hearing you talk, Stuart, like one word actually came to mind, and it's something I've been trying to latch on to, which is self-care. And so for me, that means like lots of meditation, trying to get in exercise. Like I need to take care of myself so I can show up and be there for my family. And like when else do I have like around the clock working from home? I'm trying to like in between every meeting do push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, even if it's just for 5 minutes, right? I'm just trying to get in 1 or 2 meditations a day. Like I need to take care of myself. And so I'm trying to latch on to this idea of self-care during these times because I just know I won't be able to survive them without it.
Yeah, really good.
For me, I live in LA. I've learned living, it takes practice. It takes practice to live, but in living, we tend to focus on the good times and all that, but it also comes with the so-called bad in that sense, or the polarity of that. And I guess I learned it. Maybe I learned it just from being on the planet as I am, as a Black man, and I've also lived in ashrams in India and the Himalayas in November where it's cold, and you're taking a shower and the hot water is coming through this box, and sometimes it heats up and sometimes it doesn't. To be discomfort in that, and to meditate for 8 hours a day, and just to force myself to sit and be okay with it. All these types of things contribute to me experience this in the only way I can. I can only control my response. I can't control the things around me. I can only just do what I can do. And all those things is being positive, being, creating a constructive presence in the world, as much as I can, continue to do that. And that's all we can do. And connect, community. I think community is really important to create these bonds with our families and have these discussions and talk about things. And, you know, we're very fragile people. That's one thing I also learned is, you know, thinking you're all tough because you got the facade on, and as I did when I played the game, but we're very fragile. And so it brings about a certain level of empathy. You know, okay, I got this big house and I got the cars, but now I can't drive them. I got the clothes, but you can't wear them anywhere. So what's the point? You know, so it brings you down to earth, so to speak. It grounds you to say, okay, now when we do move forward, now what is my approach going to be? You know, how am I going to take it forward? Because am I doing this for me? Because now, okay, well, I'm gonna wear these shoes in the house. You know, the wife's gonna wear the high heels in the house, or it's like it just brings it to an understanding of, okay, why am I doing this? And not just.
I wrote down my what have I learned, and I think I may have done it last week potentially. And one of the things that I wrote down was basically what you just said, is how fragile everything is, and how we think we are so on it, and we have everything, we got it all planned out, and we have what, you know, this, that, and the other, and like that, everything has changed. What priorities have changed overnight, and how much we don't have control of, which is fine, right? It's so much of what we come to understand through this practice is like you said, that I really can't control what happens to me. I can only attempt to have some control over what my response is. But man, when you have something like this happen, and it is completely black and white, there is no gray area. It is shut down, changed, and everything that you thought was important. I work in the world of professional sports. We think that it's untouchable, and overnight it was shut down, and everybody, nobody be here, and it was like, doesn't matter at all, you know, in that regard.
Yeah, I think that Wednesday night, it was the first night we were out. We had left the city, and just like that image in my head of us leaving the city, driving through the Holland Tunnel, and then that night sitting on the couch and watching Trump's press conference, and then being on Twitter and seeing the NBA shutting. It's just it was so surreal. But I would say, going to your point, Stuart, about just like not like the sort of the fragile nature of life. For me, like, I think 2020 has been just like bombarding me with that message, you know, first with Kobe, right? Kobe, he's untouchable, right? This is Kobe Bryant. Like, he and I were basically the same age, and, you know, like, Kobe was untouchable, right? And then you see this with the virus, in terms of it just being in between those two lessons. It's just like, you know what, it is just so humbling how fragile all this is. And which is why, you know, for me, like, being part of my meditation is just like really expressing love for myself and other people, and then gratitude. And, you know, if you follow me on Twitter, like, you know, I'm trying to at least once a week just like send prayers and love, and, you know, and express my gratitude for my family and friends, because like it is fragile.
A couple of things to just summarize what I've heard from all of you and what I'm hearing from others as well. Number one is perspective, and all of you are sharing your perspectives. And I've heard a lot. I work with a lot of CEOs and executives, kind of like Steve does. And the perspective that a lot of them have, where they are driven to make a lot of money, or they're driven, you know, to their EBITDA or whatever, they're focused on revenues, and now they're at home, and like there's a gratitude and perspective that a lot of people have, that what's most important, and what matters. And Keith, you're sort of hitting on that. Like, who really cares about the high heels in the house and the car and the material stuff? At the end of the day, we are being grounded with whoever we're with. And then we're using technology. I mean, FaceTime, the amount of FaceTime technology that people are leveraging, at least in my house, to connect with friends or family members, or my wife connected with her high school friends and they did a happy hour, you know, over remote, has been pretty magnificent. And so I think the reconnection back to what Keith was talking about with ourselves and who we are has been really interesting to just watch. And I think people's perspectives have shifted. The second thing I'll just talk about is a few years ago, I did a deep dive into positive psychology, and positive psychology and Martin Seligman's work is really interesting. And the notion that psychology doesn't have to just be about working with people who are sick, and we can think about what do we look like when we're at our best. And I did a deep dive into the science of happiness, and I was fascinated by that as well. And what I came out with was not to focus on happiness, but instead focus on feeling alive and really driving into this idea of feeling alive. And Steve, to some of the feelings that you're feeling right now, I think that's part of feeling alive. Just like the feeling you had when your baby was born. Those are the feelings that
I didn't know what to feel then.
but we'll talk about that on another call. But like feeling, right? Like fully feeling the emotions and feeling alive. And even as Stu was talking about us getting together and doing this panel, like I feel alive doing this. I feel like I'm learning, I'm growing, and there's parts of me that are igniting. Like I get chills running up my spine. My heart is alive. So knowing what makes us feel alive and making sure that we're sort of stepping into that feeling of feeling alive. And then the last point I'll make is part of feeling alive is also the unknown. And Keith, you played on Sundays. Stu, you've worked with the Washington Wizards, Washington Mystics, Maryland women's basketball, like some of the most elite performers. Last year with the Mystics, you guys won a championship and you were on the sideline and got to feel that transaction, right? Feel that winning. Steve, I know you're a massive Boston sports fan, and you guys have had plenty of winning over the last decade. Maybe not the next decade, right? Maybe too much winning for everybody else, right?
We could go 8-8 the rest of my life, and I'll die a happy man.
Right? And look, and I'm in Washington D.C. and over the last 2 years, we've celebrated the Washington Nationals and the Washington Mystics and the Washington Capitals, and those feelings all are a result of the unknown. So whether you're a sports fan or you're an athlete, Keith, when you're running through the tunnel on Sunday, you don't know if you're going to win or lose the game. And that unknown is beautiful. And, you know, Steve, when the baby comes out, I don't know if you knew what the gender was, but there's an unknown that occurs with birth that is beautiful. And so I sent an email to all of my clients yesterday talking about this idea of the unknown. And can we create a relationship with the unknown? Because at the end of the day, the unknown is where a lot of beautiful stuff happens. If we choose to step into it and feel it fully, including the emotions that are fearful or are anxious and are things that we might feel uncomfortable with. So I first of all just want to thank the three of you. I sent you all an email a week ago, and look at what we're able to create in a week. And so one of the opportunities that exists right now is people have space, people have time. And I truly believe if I had emailed you all 2 months ago and said, hey, I want to get you together for a panel in a week, you probably would have said, oh, well, I've got a speaking gig, or my team's, I got to go be with my team, or I'm working on this fund. Like it probably wouldn't have happened. Let's just be real. And so my hope is that in the future, we'll continue to give space to the things that we care deeply about and make us feel alive. And so I want to just express my gratitude to all of you. You do have stuff that you have to do. You have families, you've got work that needs to be done, maybe meditation practices that you're shifting around to have this conversation. And I'd like to end by giving you all a platform to either promote what you're up to. If people want to follow you, I know you all are active on social media, where people can find you. And I actually want to do, let's hold off on that. I actually want to do one more action before we get to that. So we'll close on that note. But before we close on that note, I want to give you all an opportunity to leave us with either some insight that you've gleaned from this conversation, or to ask a question to somebody during that if there's a question that you've had come up to the forefront that you've been curious to ask one of the other people on this panel. And Steve, maybe we'll start with you, then we'll go to Stu, then we'll go to Keith. But Steve, if you have a question to ask somebody that you're curious about, or an insight that you're taking with you going forward, and then I'll circle back and we can promote the different things that you all are up to.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to learn more about what Keith actually does, in terms of his work and practice. Really fascinated to see how you bring this to what you've learned over the years to how you bring it to bear and in service of other people. So that's my question. I'm fascinated. And then I think the insight for me, the thing that I always find is like, we're all so different, like we all serve different types of people, yet there's so much that actually unites us. And so like, it's, we're all so different, but like a lot of the same principles can help, an athlete, a CEO, hell, someone that just wants to create a new career. And so, it's always useful to, I guess my insight is just like, that there's a lot of these principles that don't just help like the people that we serve, but it can really be helpful for everybody.
Keith, you want to go ahead and answer his question as far as what you do?
Oh, yeah. I work with different companies like Deloitte is a client, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, those guys. I started the Congressional Yoga Association under Obama. I just, for the charity work, I have the Light Up Foundation. Here, we do a lot of work across the country here in LA. I was just, getting a doctorate, like I was mentioning, honorary doctorate from Nigeria. The ceremony was April 7th, but that's been postponed. But like, I've made it a point of just being of service. And I think that's what we're here for, to help. And the first lineage or first line of nutrition is human connection. So us coming together to connect in the various languages and ways we present it, we change worlds, we change lives. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's my purpose now.
Keith, do you have a question or any insight that you've gleaned from this conversation? Question for either anyone else on the panel or any insight?
Yeah, I would just love to know more about how you got into the practice, what really led you to it. I know I've heard a couple things, but there's some, the deeper stories of how that happened. I'd be curious to know more, and why sports. I know, and what do you see consistently in the sport world, Stu, and things like that. So that would be my questions.
Stu, why don't you take it?
I mean, I think that I got into it from a practice standpoint. Why did I begin practicing is because I think from a very early age, I was fascinated by the mind and why we feel the way we feel, and probably self-improvement, and how that connects with everything that we do. But I think that what ultimately was happening was that I was in a career that was close to what I was about, but it wasn't quite enough. It wasn't quite deep enough. There was something that was missing, and I was searching. And I read the book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And that sparked all sorts of thoughts and really made me say, I need to figure this out. I need to experience it and try to learn from it and see what it will do for me. And the reason, and I'm just being very honest, which is a good thing ultimately, that what I learned from that was that at first I didn't feel anything. And I was like, shit, I'm reading this book. It was great. And I want to feel so much more and from it. And I didn't. And so it's very helpful for me now when I'm working with clients to say, no, don't stop, and yes, you're right. You do sometimes feel like your mind is all over the place and that you can't figure it out and you can't get locked in and you can't be present to it and all these different things. Yes, that's normal. Stop. Don't think that means you're not good at this. That just is this. And so from there, that's what allowed me to build was that. But I also think that for me, when you say why sports or how did it come, is that I'm as competitive as they come. I love to win. I love this. I love that. I love sport myself. But at the end of the day, I think that I knew that there's got to be something bigger than just winning or losing. There's more to this. There's more to the connection. There's more to the struggle. There's more to all the learning that happens. And it just kept drawing me and drawing me and drawing me. And then I wanted to be able to give back somehow, some way to how is this tool that I found so useful for me? How can I give that to others? And it's funny that you said about that we're all in this thing to just as helpers to help others, because one of the things that I do with athletes and coaches is to get them to give me personal mission statements. But I started with my own personal mission statement, and it's the guiding light for everything that I do. So Brian mentioned a lot of the things that I've been able to achieve, and some of the, the wins, the championships, the trophies, and it's a wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, I never started in any way, shape, or form to do that, nor do I need that. All I want is to be able to say, if someone's working with me, was I able to help them get closer and closer to whatever it is that they're seeking and they want to achieve and they want to feel? And if I do that, I know that the byproduct ends up being working with great teams, working with great individuals, some trophies along the way, and all some monetary reward for it. But like, none of that is the goal for me. It's only this real simple vision of, can I help the people that I'm with? And if I can, I know that everything else that I need will spring from it. So that was really, it is, again, it's that connection that we're all talking about. Very different experiences are different. Who we work with is different. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I feel like that theme, it was very clear from all of us.
Stu, any other questions that are inside you that you want to get out?
It's not so much question, I don't think, is more insight, is that one of the things that I was really hoping for from this is, and this is going to probably sound super selfish, is that I wanted to be with other people that have knowledge and insight and experience that I could hear. I'm so often the person that's being asked about, how do I do, and what should I do, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm giving that insight, and it's a wonderful thing. But man, I just, like, today was so cool for me. And I known that I wanted to do that more, but this insight was that, yes, I was right. I do want to do this more. I loved being able to hear from you guys and your experience and take me deeper into my own practice and thoughts on it. So, it's my appreciation is to you guys, for sure.
Awesome.
Reach out anytime.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that what we've done is create this, community again. That to me is a really big deal, and I don't have enough of it sometimes in the actual practice. So this is really cool for me. So again, thank you.
I'll hold you all accountable next time I reach out and do one of these, and you're busy and you're ripping and running, and we'll make sure we make it happen. But Keith, why don't you start? Let people know where they can find you. I know you're on social, you've got a website, and then we'll go to Stu, and then we'll end with Steve, and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, so my website is keithmitchell59.com, keithmitchellmindfulness.com, my Instagram, keithmitchell59. That's also my Twitter and Facebook and so forth. I have a new book coming out, the Mindfulness Playbook, eight strategies that went in at the game of life. I just created an album online as well, a mindfulness meditation album, and I have a supplement line because I'm an herbalist, nutritionist, and it's coming out called a Meta. Will be out in a couple months. So,
Keith, when is the book out?
Well, the book is ready. We're just in limbo here with our Corona schedule and things like that. So, but it's ready. I'm excited for that to hit the market.
I'm looking for a signed copy, so I'll be hitting you up for that.
Of course.
Stu, why don't you go next?
There you
go. Yeah, all my social media is under Well Performance, one word. So in particular, Twitter and Instagram is where you'll find me most. I do have a Facebook business page that's Well Performance Sports Psychology. And I created an app 2 years ago, I want to say. In fact, 2 years ago, right about this month, called Do So. DOSO, one word, and it is a performance psych / mindfulness app. that I use and that I try to have all my athletes and teams use. And so that is a big thing that we've done over the last couple of years. And then lastly, I am in process. I've been working on, and this has given me the time to complete a full online master course in performance psych that is definitely tied to, there will be a part of it that's just a section of it on building our mindfulness practice, but obviously a lot of my teachings are all connected to attention and how we train the mind.
Awesome. Steve?
Sign me up.
All right. Awesome. Love to talk to you about it.
Yes.
We got a signed book. We got a signed book, and we got a subscriber or participant.
Sweet.
There you go.
And everybody can find me online at I'm pretty active on Twitter. My handle is at Schlaf, SCHLAF as in Frank. And I also have a blog. You can read about it on Twitter, but it's schlaf.me. And I write a lot. I try to write a lot and share myself with the world. So reach out, say hi, and maybe I can help you in a number of ways.
Sweet. Love it.
Awesome. I follow all three of these guys on social media, so highly recommend you do that. I'm on Twitter at Brian Levinson, and then Instagram, I do intentional_performers. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, you can listen to all these conversations at intentionalperformers.com. Fellas, thank you so much for your time. Till we meet again in person, appreciate your time, appreciate your willingness to share, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Great meeting everybody. Thanks, Brian.